What did food mean inside an ordinary Roman day? Not what people ate exactly, not ingredients, recipes, or named dishes, but how eating itself existed quietly, irregularly, and without ceremony, inside the flow of daily life. In the Roman world, food was not framed as an event. It did not stand apart from the day as something to look forward to or prepare for in advance. It was not arranged around fixed hours, formal pauses, or shared expectations. Instead, food entered the day the same way light did, or rest did, or conversation did, gradually, informally, and often without drawing attention to itself. Eating was not meant to organize the day. The day organized eating. There was no universal moment when people were supposed to eat, no shared understanding that a certain hour required a certain kind of meal. Food appeared when it was available, when time allowed, or when the body quietly asked for it. Sometimes that happened early, sometimes much later, sometimes not at all. For many Romans, eating was closer to maintenance than pleasure. Not because food was joyless, but because joy was not the goal. Food existed to sustain movement, to support work, to make rest possible later. It was part of the background rhythm of life, not a focal point demanding anticipation or reflection. Inside homes, workshops, streets, and fields, eating often happened the way pausing happened. Briefly, without announcement, without formality, a piece of bread taken while standing, a handful of olives eaten between tasks, a simple bowl shared nearby without everyone stopping what they were doing at the same time. Food did not interrupt the day dramatically. It softened it. This is why approaching Roman food through lists can feel misleading. Lists imply choice, variety, and intention. They suggest planning and preference. But for most people, most days, food was not chosen so much as encountered. It was whatever was present, familiar and manageable within the conditions of that moment. To understand what Romans ate, it helps to first let go of the idea of meals as we tend to imagine them. There was no clear division of the day into eating periods. No expectation that eating should feel complete, satisfying, or socially distinct. Food moved alongside activity rather than replacing it. Morning did not begin with a guaranteed intake of nourishment. The day often started with movement first. We waking, opening doors, stepping outside, beginning work. And food followed later if and when it fit naturally. Hunger was not ignored, but neither was it treated as urgent or scheduled. Throughout the day, eating remained flexible. A pause could become an eating moment, or it could simply pass without one. There was no pressure to replace missed food later, no sense of imbalance if one part of the day contained more nourishment than another. The body adapted to irregularity because irregularity was normal. Food was also rarely consumed in isolation from other activities, eating while talking, eating while resting, eating while watching someone else work, eating while standing in the shade. The act did not demand stillness or silence. It blended into whatever else was happening at the time. This blending mattered. When eating does not require a shift in posture, attention, or social role, it becomes less mentally demanding. The body receives what it needs without the mind needing to mark the moment as special. Eating becomes something that happens rather than something that is done. There was also little expectation that eating should produce pleasure in a modern sense. Taste mattered, but it was familiar rather than stimulating. Repetition was common. The same simple foods appeared again and again, not because of lack of imagination, but because predictability reduced effort. Predictable food meant predictable digestion. Predictable digestion meant predictable energy. Predictable energy made the rest of the day easier to inhabit. This predictability extended beyond ingredients to timing itself. Because eating did not follow a strict schedule, the body learned to function without expecting regular reinforcement. Hunger rose and fell without demanding immediate satisfaction. The sensation did not need to be solved instantly. It could be observed, tolerated, or addressed later. In this way, food shaped the Roman day quietly without dominance. It did not anchor time. It did not define social boundaries. It did not require explanation. It was simply part of the ongoing negotiation between effort and rest. Even when food was shared, it did not necessarily create a defined social event. People might eat near one another without synchronizing. One person might eat while another rested, or while someone else continued working. Togetherness did not require simultaneity. This lack of synchronization is important to notice. When eating is not collective in a strict sense, it loses some of its performative quality. There is no pressure to eat a certain amount, to finish at the same time, or to mark the beginning and end of the act clearly. Eating becomes quieter. Inside the home, this quietness was reinforced by the environment itself. Simple spaces, minimal furniture, no dedicated dining areas demanding that eating take place in a specific way. Food entered these spaces the same way everything else did, temporarily, functionally, and without ceremony. As the day moved forward, food continued to appear and disappear without leaving strong traces. There were no dramatic transitions into eating and out of it. A moment of nourishment might be followed immediately by movement, conversation, or stillness. Nothing needed to be concluded. Evening did not guarantee a final, complete meal. Sometimes food appeared later in the day, sometimes it did not. The absence of a closing meal did not feel like deprivation. It felt ordinary. The body did not expect the day to end with eating. This is perhaps one of the most important differences to hold gently in mind. For Romans, food did not frame the day from start to finish. It supported it along the way. It was present where needed, absent where unnecessary, and rarely emphasized. Because of this, food did not carry emotional weight in the way it often does now. It was not a reward for work completed. It was not a comfort meant to compensate for effort. It was part of the same fabric as work, rest, and movement. This does not mean Roman food was joyless or mechanical. It means joy did not need to be manufactured through eating. Satisfaction came from familiarity, from repetition, from the absence of constant decision-making. When food behaves predictably, the mind can relax around it. There is no need to anticipate or plan extensively. There is no pressure to optimize. The body learns what to expect, and expectation becomes ease. Tonight, we will spend time inside this quieter relationship with food. We will not move through a menu or a timeline of meals. Instead, we will observe how nourishment entered an ordinary Roman day, sometimes clearly, sometimes barely noticed, sometimes not at all. There is nothing you need to remember or follow closely. The details can pass slowly, one after another, like small pauses within the day itself. If your attention drifts, that is perfectly fine. The rhythm will continue without effort. To understand Roman food, we don't begin with recipes or ingredients. We begin with the simple fact that eating was woven into the day, not set apart from it. And because it wasn't set apart, it could arrive later, quietly, when it fit. In the Roman world, morning did not arrive carrying an expectation of eating. There was no shared assumption that waking required immediate nourishment, no cultural pause built into the early hours for a structured meal. The day began with movement first, and only later, sometimes much later, did food enter the picture. People woke as light returned to interior spaces. Doors opened, courtyards brightened, sounds began to circulate again. The body shifted from rest into activity without asking for preparation. Hunger, when it appeared, was not treated as a signal that something was missing. It was simply another sensation moving alongside the rest. For many, the first hours of the day passed without eating at all. Work began early, especially for those whose labor depended on daylight or cooler temperatures. Movement came before nourishment. Tasks took precedence over appetite. The body adjusted because it had learned to. This was not considered deprivation. It was normal. Morning hunger, when it existed, was not framed as a problem to solve immediately. There was no sense that the day could not proceed without food. The body was allowed to function on what remained from the day before, drawing quietly on stored energy without urgency or complaint. When food did appear in the morning, it did so informally. It was not prepared with intention or ceremony. There was no distinct act of making breakfast. Instead, eating happened if something happened to be present, accessible, and convenient in that moment. A piece of bread might be taken while standing. Something left over from the previous day might be consumed without comment. Water was always available, and sometimes diluted wine accompanied it, not as indulgence, but as familiarity. Nothing was heated specially, nothing was arranged. These moments did not require everyone to stop at the same time. One person might eat while another did not. One body might ask for nourishment early, while another waited until much later. There was no expectation of uniformity. The absence of a standard morning meal meant that appetite was not trained to arrive at a specific hour. Hunger did not need to announce itself on schedule. It came and went in response to movement, effort, and circumstance rather than habit. This flexibility shaped how the body understood the beginning of the day. Without a guaranteed intake of food, the body learned to remain steady rather than reactive. Energy did not spike and crash around meals. Instead, it shifted gradually, guided by the rhythm of activity itself. Food, in this context, functioned as support rather than stimulus. When it appeared, it reinforced what was already happening rather than initiating something new. Eating did not start the day. The day invited eating when it was ready. This is an important distinction. In a world without fixed morning meals, the body does not wait to be fed before it begins to move. It trusts that nourishment will arrive when needed. That trust reduces urgency. It quiets expectation. Because food was not guaranteed in the morning, small amounts were enough when it did appear. There was no pressure to eat enough to last until some later, defined moment. Eating could remain light, partial, and brief. A few bites were sufficient. A sip of liquid was enough. Nothing needed to feel complete. This incompleteness was not uncomfortable. It was simply the absence of excess. The body remained alert without being stimulated. Attention stayed narrow, focused on immediate tasks rather than internal signals demanding satisfaction. In many homes, morning eating was almost invisible. It left no trace. No table needed to be cleared. No space needed to be transformed. Food entered and exited the morning quietly without reshaping the environment around it. This quietness matters. When eating does not require preparation or cleanup, it does not dominate attention. It does not claim a portion of the day for itself. It passes through like any other small pause. Children observed this rhythm early. They learned that eating was optional in the morning, not mandatory. They learned to listen to the body without interpreting every sensation as instruction. Hunger became familiar rather than alarming. Adults carried this familiarity into work, into movement, into long stretches of time without interruption. The body learned endurance without tension. Energy was conserved rather than replenished aggressively. This did not mean that food lacked importance. It meant that importance was distributed across the day rather than concentrated at its beginning. Nourishment was something that could wait. When morning food was skipped entirely, it did not require compensation later. The body did not demand replacement or balance. There was no concept of having missed something. The day simply continued. This continuity is difficult to notice at first because modern habits teach us to mark beginnings clearly. But in the Roman morning, the beginning was soft. There was no clear threshold that separated rest from activity or hunger from satisfaction. Instead, the day opened gradually. Light increased, movement followed, food arrived if it fit. Because of this, eating never felt like a duty. It was not something one was required to do before proceeding. It was something one responded to when appropriate. This response-based relationship with food shaped the rest of the day. It trained the body to wait, to adapt, and to remain calm in the absence of immediate input. Hunger became part of the background rather than the foreground. As the morning progressed, food might appear again, or it might not. Nothing needed to be decided in advance. The body did not anticipate future meals. It lived within the present conditions. In this way, the Roman morning offers a quiet lesson about rhythm rather than routine. It shows how a day can begin without being anchored by nourishment, and how the body can remain balanced without fixed schedules. The day did not open with eating, it opened with movement. And only after movement had already shaped the morning did food sometimes enter, gently and without emphasis, as one more small element woven into the unfolding hours. When food entered the Roman day, it did not arrive as a destination. It appeared briefly, almost incidentally, between one activity and the next. The day did not turn toward eating. Eating stepped into the day for a moment, then stepped out again without changing its direction. There was no fixed point when everything stopped so that people could gather around food. Work did not pause to make room for a meal. Instead, nourishment slipped into small openings that already existed. Moments when hands slowed, when movement paused, when attention briefly loosened. These pauses were short. They were not designed to hold the body in place. Often they happened standing, leaning, or half-turned toward the next task. Food was consumed in a way that allowed the day to resume immediately afterward without transition. There was rarely a table set aside for these moments. No dedicated space announced that eating was about to happen. A piece of bread might be taken where it was stored. Something simple might be reached for without sitting down. The body did not change posture in order to eat. It adjusted just enough to allow food to pass through. Because eating did not require a change of setting, it did not demand attention. The act was small, contained, and almost background. Hands moved, the mouth worked. The rest of the body remained oriented toward what came next. This way of eating did not feel rushed. It felt proportionate. Food occupied exactly as much time as it needed, no more, no less. Once nourishment had done its work, the pause dissolved naturally. In this rhythm, eating was never framed as an event. There was no expectation that it should feel satisfying in itself. Satisfaction came later as energy returned, as effort became easier, as movement continued without strain. Simple foods supported this rhythm because they required nothing from the moment in which they were eaten. Bread did not need preparation, cheese did not need attention. Olives and fruit asked only to be taken, not transformed. Thick porridges, when they appeared, could be eaten slowly or quickly, warm or cooling, without ceremony. These foods did not announce themselves as meals. They existed as resources, available, familiar, and undemanding. Because of this, eating did not divide the day into before and after. It did not create a hinge around which time turned. The hours on either side of nourishment felt continuous. There was no sharp boundary where work ended and rest began simply because food appeared. Instead, food softened the day slightly, just enough to allow effort to continue. Often, these pauses occurred alone, even within shared spaces. One person might stop briefly while others continued moving nearby. There was no signal that eating required company. It did not ask to be witnessed. In this environment, the body learned that nourishment did not need to be maximized. It did not need to be stretched into an occasion. A few moments were enough. This had a quiet effect on appetite. Hunger did not build toward a climax. It ebbed and flowed gently, responding to activity rather than waiting for release. Eating relieved hunger without replacing it with heaviness. Because food did not reorganize the day, it did not compete with it. There was no internal negotiation about whether to stop or continue. The pause arrived when it fit. When it no longer fit, it ended. This made the act of eating remarkably calm. There was no pressure to consume a certain amount, no anxiety about timing, no sense of missing out if the moment passed without food. Another pause would appear later, or it would not. Either way, the day would continue. In many cases, the body ate while remaining oriented outward, toward work, toward movement, toward light. Eyes did not need to lower. Posture did not need to collapse into rest. Eating was integrated into activity rather than set against it. This integration mattered. It prevented food from becoming a psychological marker. Eating did not signal reward, escape, or relief from obligation. It simply supported what was already happening. When food is treated this way, it does not gather emotional weight. It does not carry expectation. It does not promise comfort beyond what it can deliver. It delivers steadiness instead. The repetition of these small pauses shaped the body's understanding of nourishment. Energy arrived gradually rather than all at once. There were no dramatic shifts between hunger and fullness. Sensation stayed within a narrow, manageable range. Because the body was never pulled far in either direction, it remained stable. This stability made longer stretches of activity possible without strain. Movement could continue because eating did not interrupt momentum. It restored just enough to allow the next effort to feel similar to the last. In this sense, eating truly interrupted the day, but only lightly. It created a momentary break in motion without reorganizing the flow. The interruption was gentle, almost invisible. The day remained primary. Food remained secondary. Even when people did sit briefly, the posture was transitional. A bench might be used for a moment, a step, a low surface. These were not places designed for lingering. They were places designed to hold the body briefly before it moved again. There was no expectation that eating required rest. It could accompany rest, but it did not require it. This difference shaped how the body experienced fullness. Because eating did not coincide with prolonged stillness, heaviness did not settle in. The body remained lightly engaged, preventing the dulling that comes from large, centralized meals. Attention stayed external. The mind did not turn inward to monitor digestion or satisfaction. Eating happened, then attention returned to the world. Over time, this created a relationship with food that was remarkably neutral. Food was not something to look forward to or plan around. It was something to respond to when it appeared. This neutrality is essential to understanding Roman daily eating. Without formal meals, there was no sense of falling behind or getting ahead. There was only responsiveness. When food was absent for longer stretches, the body adapted without distress. When it appeared more frequently, it was accepted without indulgence. The rhythm adjusted without commentary. This made the day feel even, not divided into peaks and valleys. Importantly, this pattern was shared across social boundaries. While quantities and qualities of food varied, the structure of eating as interruption rather than event remained consistent. The pause did not become more formal with status. It remained a pause. Even in wealthier homes, daily eating outside of later social gatherings followed similar rhythms. Nourishment supported activity. It did not replace it. Because eating did not demand a table, it did not demand time. Because it did not demand time, it did not dominate the day. The result was a life where food moved quietly through the hours, appearing and disappearing without altering their shape. As the day progressed, these pauses accumulated without being counted. They did not form meals, they formed continuity. The body learned to trust that nourishment would appear often enough without needing to be scheduled. The mind learned to release attention from food altogether. This is what allowed work, movement, and rest to exist without friction. Nothing needed to be arranged around eating. Eating arranged itself around everything else. And so, as the day continued to unfold, food remained present but uninsistent, never calling attention to itself, never asking to be central, always ready to step aside again. In the Roman day, eating did not organize time. It interrupted it gently, just long enough to allow the body to continue. As the day continued, the quiet pattern became clearer. There was no fixed moment when one was supposed to eat. No shared expectation that food should appear at a certain hour. Eating happened when conditions allowed it, not when time demanded it. This absence of fixed timing did not create confusion, it created openness. The day did not move toward meals as milestones. Instead, meals dissolved into the broader movement of hours, appearing wherever they could fit without resistance. Food entered the day when it was available. If something was at hand, it might be eaten. If nothing was available, the day continued unchanged. Availability mattered more than timing, and timing mattered less than circumstance. Time itself was not a reliable guide. Light mattered, heat mattered, effort mattered. But the number of hours passed since the last pause did not carry meaning on its own. The body did not wait for permission to eat, nor did it expect eating to arrive predictably. Some days included several small moments of nourishment. Other days included very few, and some days passed with almost none at all until later. These differences were not experienced as disruption. They were simply variations within a familiar range. The same person could eat early one day and late the next without noticing the shift. The rhythm did not need to be repeated to feel stable. Stability came from adaptability rather than repetition. Seasons shaped everything quietly. In warmer months, the body moved differently, rested differently, and asked for food differently. Heat reduced appetite at certain hours and increased it at others, without explanation or concern. In cooler seasons, hunger might arrive sooner or linger longer. Food might be eaten closer to sources of warmth or postponed until movement slowed. These changes were not adjustments to a schedule. They were responses to conditions. Because seasons altered work, light, and energy, they also altered eating without needing to announce the change. There was no moment when one pattern ended and another began. The transition was gradual, almost invisible. Weather played a role as well. A cloudy day could soften effort and delay hunger. A bright, demanding day could draw energy out more quickly. Food followed these shifts quietly, without becoming the focus of them. Availability mattered in practical ways. If bread was present, it could be eaten. If fruit was accessible, it might be taken. If nothing had been prepared or carried, the pause simply did not happen. The day did not stop to correct this absence. Time spent obtaining food also shaped when it appeared. If work or movement kept the body far from stored provisions, eating was delayed naturally. If the body remained close to home or familiar spaces, nourishment appeared more easily. This meant that 2 days that looked similar from the outside could feel very different inside. One might include several pauses for food, another might include none until much later. The difference was not planned, it emerged. There was no expectation that a day should contain a certain number of eating moments. The body did not measure success or failure based on intake. It responded to what was present and continued forward. Hunger itself was not always sharp. Often, it appeared as a soft signal rather than a demand, a slight loss of strength, a subtle slowing, a change in focus. These signals did not require immediate response. When food followed soon after, it was accepted. When it did not, the body adapted, movement adjusted, effort softened, stillness increased. The The day reshaped itself around the body's condition rather than forcing nourishment into place. Because of this, eating did not anchor the day, it floated within it. One person might eat while another did not, even while sharing the same space. Their rhythms did not need to align. There was no shared obligation to pause together. Nourishment was personal, but not private. The lack of synchronization did not feel isolating, it felt normal. Each body followed its own signals within a shared environment that allowed variation without conflict. This irregularity extended across social life as well. Shared food appeared at certain moments, but daily nourishment remained unscheduled even within households. People ate when it fit their movement and energy, not when a bell or custom required it. Even later in the day, when larger gatherings sometimes occurred, earlier nourishment did not adjust itself to prepare for them. The body did not save room. It responded as it always did, moment by moment. This created a life where the same day never repeated itself exactly. The pattern was recognizable, but the details shifted constantly. No 2 days asked the same questions of the body. One day might begin with movement and include food early. Another might begin the same way, but delay nourishment until much later. The body did not expect consistency, it expected responsiveness. Because of this expectation, irregularity did not create anxiety. There was no sense that something was wrong when hunger arrived earlier or later. It was simply information, not a problem. The absence of fixed eating times also meant that food did not divide the day into sections. There was no before and after that changed the meaning of the hours. Time remained continuous. Morning did not become afternoon because of eating. Afternoon did not become evening because of a meal. These transitions were marked by light, sound, and activity, not by food. This continuity mattered deeply. It allowed the day to remain whole rather than segmented. Eating did not fracture experience into parts. It passed through without leaving sharp edges. Because food was not tied to the clock, where it existed, had little authority over the body. The body listened to sensation, not instruction. Hunger was felt, not scheduled. This did not mean that the body was constantly aware of hunger. Often, awareness remained elsewhere. Work, movement, and environment occupied attention more fully than internal signals. Hunger became noticeable mainly when movement slowed, when effort paused, when the body had space to register itself. In this way, eating often followed rest rather than preceding it. A pause might begin without food and end with it, or begin with food and end without it. The order did not matter. The pause itself was primary. Nourishment was secondary. Over time, this shaped a very different relationship with time. Hours were not containers to be filled with prescribed actions. They were open fields where activity and rest shifted fluidly. Eating fit into these shifts without controlling them. This is why the same hour could feel nourishing one day and empty the next without creating tension. The meaning of the hour was not fixed by what happened within it. Even the idea of late or early carried little weight. Without fixed moments of expectation, these labels lost importance. Food did not arrive late. It arrived when it arrived. The body adjusted to this uncertainty by becoming flexible rather than vigilant. It did not wait anxiously for nourishment. It trusted that it would appear when conditions allowed. This trust reduced mental noise. There was no constant calculation about timing or adequacy. Attention remained free to move outward toward the day itself. Irregularity, in this sense, was not disorder. It was a different form of order, one based on responsiveness rather than repetition. The body learned that no single moment defined nourishment. It emerged across time, unevenly but sufficiently. That unevenness was not corrected, it was accepted. As the day continued to unfold, food remained present without becoming predictable. Its arrival never defined the hour. It passed through quietly, leaving the rhythm intact. And so, nourishment remained woven into life without ever anchoring it. The day did not revolve around eating. Eating revolved around the day. Because nourishment did not anchor the day, the specific foods themselves carried less symbolic weight. What mattered was not variety or novelty, but reliability. Food needed to sustain the body quietly without demanding attention or preparation beyond what daily life could easily provide. Most nourishment came from what could be stored, reused, and prepared with minimal effort. Cereals formed the steady foundation of this system. Grain, once processed, could appear again and again in slightly different forms without losing its familiarity. Grain did not represent abundance or scarcity on its own. It represented continuity. Once harvested and stored, it offered a dependable source of energy that did not change quickly. Its predictability mattered more than its flavor. Whether eaten as bread, porridge, or a simple mash, grain entered the body gently. It did not excite, it did not surprise, it supported movement, then allowed rest without calling attention to itself. Legumes complemented this foundation in a similar way. Beans, lentils, and peas were valued not for variety, but for endurance. They could be dried, stored, and returned to repeatedly without losing usefulness. Like grain, legumes did not demand reinvention. They were prepared simply and eaten often. Their role was not to diversify the diet, but to deepen its stability. Vegetables filled the space between these staples. What appeared depended on season, location, and access, but the approach remained consistent. Vegetables were eaten because they were present, not because they were sought out for pleasure. Leafy greens, roots, and cultivated plants entered the day quietly. They were added to what already existed rather than standing alone. Their flavors were familiar enough to disappear into routine. Preparation remained minimal. Cooking did not aim to transform ingredients into something new. It aimed to make them digestible, warm, or easier to consume. Complexity was unnecessary. Because of this simplicity, meals did not feel constructed. They felt assembled. What was at hand was combined, warmed if needed, and eaten without ceremony. Repetition was not experienced as limitation. It was experienced as reassurance. The body recognized what it was receiving and responded without resistance. There was no need to evaluate each eating moment anew. This predictability allowed attention to remain elsewhere. Food did not interrupt thought or movement. It supported them quietly, then receded. Meat occupied a very different place within this rhythm. It was present, but not central. When it appeared, it did so contextually rather than routinely. Meat was often tied to specific moments rather than daily expectation. A gathering, a market opportunity, a particular circumstance. It did not structure the day, it entered it briefly. When eaten, meat did not transform the overall pattern. It was added to an existing framework rather than redefining it. The body received it as nourishment, not as a focal event. Because meat was not constant, it did not become necessary for daily balance. The body adapted to a rhythm where its presence was occasional and its absence unremarkable. Fish followed a similar logic, shaped by geography rather than preference. Where water was accessible, fish appeared more regularly. Where it was not, it remained rare. Even then, fish was not elevated into spectacle. It was preserved, prepared, and consumed with the same restraint as other foods. Its role was practical, not celebratory. Preservation mattered more than freshness. Drying, salting, or otherwise extending the life of food ensured that nourishment remained available without constant effort. This extended stability across time. Because preserved foods were reliable, they reduced uncertainty. The body could trust that something would be available even when conditions were less favorable. Flavor existed, but it was subdued. Strong tastes were not absent, but they were not sought after daily. The The goal was not stimulation, it was sufficiency. This sufficiency shaped expectation. When food does not change often, the body stops anticipating surprise. It accepts what is given and moves on. The absence of constant variety did not produce boredom in the way we might assume. Instead, it produced familiarity. Familiarity reduced decision-making. The body did not need to choose. Eating became simpler because there was little to consider. The question was not what, but whether. Whether food was present, whether the body needed it. When both aligned, eating happened. When they did not, the day continued uninterrupted. This simplicity also reduced emotional attachment to food. Nourishment was not tied to reward, comfort, or anticipation. It served a physical function without acquiring symbolic weight. Because of this, eating did not carry guilt or indulgence. It did not need to be justified or earned. It was simply one of many quiet acts that sustained life. Repetition reinforced this neutrality. When the same foods appear again and again, they lose the ability to excite or disappoint. They become part of the background. This background role was important. It allowed food to exist without dominating attention. The body received energy without being pulled into evaluation. Over time, this created a steady internal rhythm. Energy rose and fell predictably, not because meals were timed, but because nourishment was consistent enough to support daily demands. The body did not experience sharp fluctuations caused by novelty or excess. It moved within a narrow, familiar range. That range supported endurance rather than intensity. This endurance mattered more than pleasure. Daily life required sustained effort, not bursts of stimulation. Food supported that need quietly. Even when food was shared, the focus remained restrained. Eating together did not automatically turn nourishment into spectacle. It remained part of the day rather than separate from it. Conversation might accompany eating, or silence might remain. The presence of food did not demand a change in tone. It fit into whatever rhythm already existed. This integration prevented food from becoming an event. It remained an interval. Because of this, the absence of variety did not feel like lack. It felt like stability. Stability reduced uncertainty, and uncertainty required less attention. The body learned to trust what it was given. It did not wait for something better. It accepted what arrived. This acceptance shaped appetite itself. Hunger did not grow impatient. It remained responsive rather than demanding. The body adjusted its expectations to match reality. Over time, nourishment became almost invisible. It supported life without announcing itself. The body received it and returned to movement, rest, or stillness. This invisibility was not neglect, it was efficiency. Energy was preserved for what mattered most, living through the day. In this way, Roman food did not tell stories about identity, creativity, or pleasure. It told a quieter story about continuity. Grain returned, legumes followed, vegetables appeared when they could, meat and fish entered occasionally, then disappeared again. The pattern repeated without friction. Each repetition reinforced trust. The body did not need to wonder what would come next. It already knew the range. This knowledge allowed attention to soften. Eating did not demand planning, anticipation, or memory. It existed fully in the present moment. Because food was predictable, the mind did not linger on it. Nourishment ended when the body had enough, not when a portion was completed. This allowed eating to stop naturally. There was no pressure to finish. The day continued as soon as the body was ready. And so, what Romans ate was not defined by abundance or scarcity, but by steadiness. The diet did not aim to impress or entertain. It aimed to last. That lasting quality mattered more than variety. It supported a life where energy needed to be sustained quietly across many hours. Food, like so many other elements of Roman daily life, avoided extremes. It neither overwhelmed nor disappeared. It remained present enough to support the body and quiet enough to remain in the background. In this way, nourishment continued to follow the same principle that shaped the day itself. It did not organize life, it accompanied it. Because nourishment accompanied the day rather than organizing it, cooking followed the same quiet logic. It was not something that needed to happen often, and it was rarely treated as a separate phase of daily life. Instead, it appeared when conditions allowed and receded when they did not, blending into the rhythm already in motion. Cooking was not driven by urgency. There was no pressure to prepare food quickly, no expectation that something new had to appear at a specific hour. When cooking happened, it unfolded slowly, shaped by patience rather than efficiency. Time was not measured against hunger. Hunger adjusted itself to time. Fire was central to this process, but it was approached carefully. Flame was controlled, not intensified. A steady heat mattered more than speed. Cooking did not rush toward completion. It remained attentive to what the fire allowed rather than pushing it to deliver results faster. Because fire required attention, cooking demanded presence, but not intensity. Someone remained nearby, adjusting fuel, stirring occasionally, observing changes that occurred gradually. These movements were small and repetitive, almost meditative. Nothing sudden was expected. Food was placed over heat and left to transform at its own pace. Grain softened slowly. Legumes absorbed warmth over long periods. Liquids thickened without being forced. Cooking did not aim to surprise. It aimed to last. This slowness mattered because food was expected to serve more than one moment. What was cooked often needed to be shared, saved, or returned to later. A meal did not need to peak in flavor. It needed to remain edible and sustaining over time. Because of this, cooking rarely happened in isolation. It existed alongside other quiet actions. Someone might sit nearby, mend fabric, or simply wait while food warmed. Cooking did not demand full attention. It allowed the mind to remain soft. There were no quick steps to follow, no sequence that had to be completed precisely. Instead, cooking responded to cues that were easy to read: texture softening, steam rising gently, sound changing slightly. These signals were familiar enough to require little thought. The absence of urgency meant that mistakes carried little consequence. If something cooked longer than expected, it rarely mattered. Extended heat often made food easier to digest rather than ruined. Time was not an enemy. Because cooking was infrequent, it did not dominate the day. It appeared as one more background activity rather than a focal event. The household did not gather around the act of cooking itself. It simply allowed it to happen. Preparation before cooking was equally simple. Ingredients were already familiar. Nothing needed to be assembled in advance with precision. What existed was used. What did not exist was not replaced. This simplicity reduced decision-making. There was no moment where someone stood uncertain about what to cook. The question was not what should we make, but what can be warmed, softened, or shared. Cooking did not aim to impress anyone. It did not need to demonstrate skill or creativity. Its purpose was durability. Food needed to hold together, to travel across time without losing usefulness. Because of this, flavors remained restrained. Strong seasoning was unnecessary. Subtlety supported repetition. When food tastes familiar, it can be eaten again without resistance. The body responded well to this predictability. Digestion remained steady. Energy was released gradually. There were no sharp peaks that required recovery afterward. Cooking, then, was not about producing pleasure. It was about maintaining balance. The body received nourishment that supported work, rest, and sleep without disrupting rhythm. Fire was extinguished or reduced as soon as it had done its work. There was no reason to keep it active longer than necessary. Cooking did not linger once its purpose had been fulfilled. Leftovers were not treated as secondary. They were part of the plan, even if the plan was never articulated. Food that remained could be eaten later without explanation. This allowed cooking to happen less frequently. A single effort could support multiple moments of nourishment. The household did not need to repeat the same task again and again within a single day. Because cooking took time but did not demand constant action, it fit easily into slower parts of the day. It did not interrupt movement abruptly, it aligned with natural pauses. Often cooking occurred during moments when other activities had already slowed. The body was no longer rushing. The environment had softened. Cooking filled this space without changing its tone. This alignment mattered. It prevented cooking from becoming stressful. When there is no deadline, there is no pressure. Food arrived when it arrived. The tools involved were simple and familiar. Vessels used for cooking had already been used many times before. Their behavior was known, how they held heat, how quickly they cooled, how they responded to flame. This familiarity reduced vigilance. There was little need to watch closely. The cook could step away briefly, return, adjust, and wait again. Nothing demanded constant monitoring. Cooking sounds were gentle, a low simmer, a soft shift in texture, no sharp noises. These sounds blended easily into the background, reinforcing calm rather than interrupting it. Smells emerged slowly as well. Not sudden bursts, but gradual presence. Warm grain, soft legumes, steam carrying faint scent. These smells did not stimulate appetite aggressively, they signaled continuity. Because cooking did not announce itself dramatically, it did not trigger anticipation. The body did not tense or lean forward. It remained where it was, knowing food would arrive when ready. Sharing followed naturally. Food that was prepared slowly could be divided without ceremony. Portions were not measured precisely. Each person took what was needed. This lack of precision did not create conflict. Because expectations were modest, there was little fear of shortage. What existed was enough. Cooking supported this trust. When food is steady rather than spectacular, it does not invite competition, it invites acceptance. The act of cooking itself was rarely praised or noticed. It was expected, but not highlighted. Like many other domestic actions, it existed without commentary. Because of this, cooking did not become an identity. It was not tied to status or recognition. It was simply part of maintaining life. This anonymity contributed to its calming effect. When an action does not define the person performing it, it can be done without self-consciousness. The body moves, hands work, the mind remains quiet. Cooking also respected limits. When fuel was scarce or conditions were poor, cooking adjusted. Less was prepared. Simpler forms were used. The system bent without breaking. This adaptability prevented frustration. The goal was not consistency of outcome, but consistency of function. Food needed to nourish. That was enough. Because cooking did not demand perfection, it did not require recovery. There was no emotional cost. When food was done, it was done. Afterward, the space returned to stillness easily. Tools were set aside, fire reduced. Nothing lingered that needed to be addressed urgently. The day absorbed the act of cooking without changing direction. Nourishment entered quietly, then receded into the background. In this way, cooking mirrored the broader relationship with food. It did not organize the day, it accompanied it. The slowness of cooking supported rest rather than interrupting it. Hands repeated familiar movements. Attention drifted. Time stretched gently. These conditions made cooking compatible with evening and night. It did not stimulate wakefulness. It allowed it to dissolve. As darkness approached, cooking either ended naturally or continued softly, without urgency to conclude. Food did not need to be ready before night. Night adjusted around it. This acceptance removed pressure from both body and mind. There was no final push, no rush toward completion. Cooking existed inside the same quiet continuum as eating. Both supported life without demanding focus. And so, just as nourishment avoided spectacle, cooking avoided urgency. It moved at the pace of the household rather than against it. The result was not excitement or indulgence, but steadiness. A form of care that did not announce itself but remained reliable. In this way, cooking became one more quiet thread woven through the day. Not a highlight, not a burden. Simply part of how life sustained itself. Because cooking had settled quietly into the background of the day, eating followed with the same lack of ceremony. Food was present, but it did not announce itself as an event. It did not gather people into a single moment or demand that attention align. Instead, it remained available, allowing each person to approach it when conditions felt right. Eating together did not mean eating at the same time. It meant existing within the same space while nourishment circulated gently among the household. One person might eat while another rested. Someone else might return to food later, after finishing a task or simply after waiting a while. The presence of food did not synchronize behavior. There was no fixed hour that defined when eating should occur. The household did not pause collectively. Movement continued, life overlapped. Eating slipped into these overlaps without requiring coordination. It was not separate from activity, it was woven into it. Food might be placed in a central location, accessible rather than presented. It did not need to be served formally. It did not need to be distributed evenly at a single moment. Each person took what was needed when it was needed without explanation. This created a form of togetherness that did not rely on shared timing. People were aware of one another, but they were not required to mirror each other's actions. Eating was personal, even when it happened in common space. Someone might eat while standing briefly, then move on. Another might sit longer, taking small portions slowly. Someone else might return later, after the space had quieted again. None of this disrupted the household rhythm. It was expected. Because there was no ritualized meal, there was no pressure to participate fully. No one was missing anything by eating later or earlier. There was no sense that a moment had passed irretrievably. Food did not belong to a narrow window of time. Conversation, when it happened, was incidental rather than planned. People might speak while eating or they might not. Silence did not signal absence of connection. It signaled comfort with presence. Eating did not require a table arranged for the purpose. It did not require seating for everyone at once. The space adapted naturally. Someone might sit on a low bench, another might lean against a wall. Posture followed convenience rather than formality. Because eating was not ritualized, it did not demand emotional energy. There was no expectation that it should be enjoyable, social, or meaningful in a symbolic way. It was meaningful through repetition, not emphasis. This reduced strain. When eating is not an event, it does not require preparation beyond the food itself. The body can receive nourishment without shifting into a different mode of attention. The household did not need to agree on when to eat. Each person followed internal cues shaped by movement, fatigue, and availability. The shared environment allowed this flexibility without conflict. This flexibility was supported by the nature of the food itself. Because meals were simple and stable, they could be eaten at different times without losing their usefulness. Food did not deteriorate quickly. It did not demand immediate consumption. As a result, eating became a quiet background activity. It appeared, disappeared, and reappeared across the day without reshaping it. Nourishment circulated without ceremony. Children absorbed this rhythm naturally. They learned that eating did not interrupt life dramatically. It happened alongside it. They ate when hungry, stopped when satisfied, and moved on without lingering. Older members of the household followed similar patterns, though often more slowly. Their eating did not require accommodation. The environment already allowed for variation. Because eating was not synchronized, there was little need to watch others closely. The mind did not track who had eaten and who had not. Trust replaced monitoring. This trust extended to quantity as well. There was no counting of portions, no sense that food needed to be divided precisely at a single moment. Sharing unfolded over time rather than through immediate distribution. The absence of ritual also meant the absence of performance. No one needed to demonstrate gratitude, restraint, or enthusiasm. Eating did not become a measure of behavior. Because of this, the body could remain relaxed while eating. Digestion benefited from calm. There was no hurry to finish, no reason to rush through the act. Eating might occur during moments of waiting. Someone might take a few bites while resting briefly between tasks. Another might eat while listening to nearby sounds. Nourishment blended into stillness. Even when people ate in close proximity, they did not need to engage directly. Presence was enough. The shared space held everyone without requiring interaction. This form of eating supported rest rather than disrupting it. There were no sharp transitions between hunger and fullness. The body moved gradually between states. The lack of ritual also meant that eating did not define social hierarchy within the household. Everyone approached food in similar ways. There was no elevated moment reserved for certain people. Food did not mark the day's progress. It did not announce that morning had ended or evening had begun. Those transitions occurred independently, guided by light, movement, and fatigue. Because eating was not tied to a central moment, it did not compete with other rhythms. It adjusted itself around them. When activity increased, eating receded. When activity slowed, eating became easier. As evening approached, this pattern remained intact. People might eat less or more slowly. Food did not gather the household into a final shared event. It faded gently along with the day. There was no final meal that signaled closure. Nourishment did not conclude the day. It simply ceased to be needed as activity diminished. This absence of a formal ending supported sleep. The body did not associate eating with stimulation or anticipation. There was no emotional charge attached to the act. If someone felt hungry later, food could still be taken quietly. There was no sense that eating late was improper or disruptive. The household adapted without comment. This flexibility prevented tension. Hunger did not need to be endured until a specific time, nor did eating need to be justified if it occurred outside a schedule. Over time, this way of eating shaped the body's expectations. Hunger was experienced as a signal rather than a problem. Nourishment responded when possible, without urgency. Because eating did not carry symbolic weight, it did not need to be remembered. It did not stand out as a highlight or a disappointment. It blended into memory the way breathing does. The shared environment supported this blending. Familiar sounds continued. Familiar light remained. Eating did not change the atmosphere. It existed within it. Within. This allowed the mind to remain soft. Attention did not sharpen around food. It stayed diffuse, allowing rest to arrive more easily afterward. Eating together in this sense was not about unity through synchronization. It was about coexistence. People nourished themselves while remaining gently aware of others nearby. This awareness did not require engagement. It required only trust. Trust that the environment would remain stable. Trust that food would be available again when needed. In this way, shared eating reinforced the same principle that shaped the rest of Roman domestic life. Life did not need to be organized into sharp moments to function well. Nourishment did not need ceremony. It needed only space, time, and acceptance. And as the day continued to quiet, eating followed suit, thinning out naturally until it no longer needed to appear at all. As nourishment thinned out toward the end of the day, evening did not gather it back together. There was no moment when food returned as a focal point, no clear signal that eating should now become central again. The day did not close around a final act of nourishment. It simply continued softening. In the Roman household, evening did not demand food in the way other parts of the day sometimes did. Activity slowed, movement became smaller, the body required less energy, not more. And because of that, eating often became less necessary rather than more. Sometimes food appeared again as the light faded. Sometimes it did not. There was no expectation either way. Evening was not a promise of nourishment. It was a condition the body entered quietly, guided more by fatigue than by appetite. If food did appear, it was rarely something prepared specifically for that moment. It was what already existed, what remained from earlier, what could be reached without effort. There was no new beginning in evening eating, only continuation. A piece of bread might be taken and eaten slowly without accompaniment. A small portion of something cooked earlier might be shared. Cold food was not treated as incomplete. It was simply food that no longer required fire. There was no sense that the body needed a full intake before rest could begin. Hunger, if present, was mild. It did not demand satisfaction. It could be acknowledged and left unanswered without discomfort. Because of this, evening eating remained optional. It did not organize the household. It did not draw people together. It did not interrupt the settling of the space. If someone ate, they did so quietly, often without sitting down for long. The act did not expand. It did not grow into a gathering. It remained contained, like a final small movement before stillness. Others might choose not to eat at all. This absence was not remarked upon. It was not seen as deprivation or restraint. It was simply part of the body's response to a day that had already given enough. Evening did not reset appetite, it softened it. The body, already slowing, did not seek stimulation through food, it leaned toward rest instead. Because there was no fixed expectation, no one waited for food to arrive, no one prepared themselves for it. Evening did not hold anticipation, it held release. Food, when present, did not carry warmth as a requirement. Warmth was not essential at this point in the day. The body was no longer active enough to need it. Cold or room temperature nourishment felt sufficient. Fire, if it had been used earlier, was allowed to fade. There was no need to reignite it for the sake of eating. The effort did not match the body's needs. This meant that evening remained quiet. No additional activity was created. No smoke filled the space again. No new sounds entered the household rhythm. The absence of a central meal also meant the absence of a clear dividing line between day and night. There was no final act that closed one phase and opened another. Transition happened without punctuation. Eating did not signal completion. It did not confirm that the day was finished. It simply appeared, or did not, without consequence. This allowed evening to remain fluid. One person might eat earlier, another later, someone else not at all. The household did not synchronize around nourishment. As light dimmed further, even the presence of food became less noticeable. Objects remained where they were. No effort was made to arrange or remove them immediately. Everything could wait. If something remained uneaten, it was not a problem. It would still exist tomorrow. Food did not expire emotionally at the end of the day. This reduced pressure. Nothing needed to be used up. Nothing needed to be completed. The evening did not demand resolution. The body, sensing this openness, did not resist settling. It did not remain alert in expectation of a final event. It began to let go naturally. Hunger, if it returned briefly, was often mild and passing. It did not escalate. It did not insist. The slowing of the body softened it before it could grow. This created a gentle descent into night. The absence of a defined eating moment allowed attention to thin without interruption. Food did not compete with fatigue. It did not hold the body in activity longer than necessary. Evening favored rest over replenishment. In this way, nourishment stepped aside as the day ended. It did not attempt to shape the transition. It trusted the body to know what was enough. Even children followed this rhythm naturally. They ate when hunger appeared earlier in the day. By evening, their bodies were more interested in stillness than in food. Older members of the household experienced the same quiet reduction. Eating became lighter or disappeared entirely without effort. Because this pattern repeated daily, it felt stable rather than uncertain. Evening did not surprise anyone by withholding food. It simply reflected the body's reduced demand. The household learned to recognize this state. When eating no longer appeared, it signaled that the day had already given what it could. This understanding removed anxiety. No one feared the absence of food in the evening. It was not a loss. It was a sign of sufficiency. Food had done its work earlier. It did not need to return to prove anything. And so, evening remained unclaimed by nourishment. It belonged instead to quiet presence, shared space, and the gradual release of effort. As darkness gathered, the body no longer oriented itself around intake. It oriented itself around rest. The household did not gather to eat. It gathered to settle. And in that settling, food faded from importance without disappearing entirely. It remained part of life, but no longer part of the moment. This gentle absence allowed night to arrive without resistance. Nothing held the body awake. Nothing pulled attention outward. The day did not close with eating. It closed by letting go. As the day released its final demands, food no longer needed to appear at all. It did not withdraw suddenly. It simply settled into the background where it had always belonged. Nourishment did not mark the end of the day. It faded alongside it. Throughout an ordinary Roman day, food rarely stood at the center of attention. It arrived quietly when conditions allowed and left just as quietly when it was no longer needed. This pattern did not change at night. It simply became more noticeable as activity thinned. Food did not structure time. It did not divide the day into clear sections. It moved within the rhythm already established by light, movement, and rest. In this way, nourishment followed life rather than organizing it. Because eating was never the primary focus, it did not carry emotional weight. It was not anticipated as a reward. It was not remembered as a highlight. It existed as one of many steady elements that supported the body without demanding attention. This absence of emphasis softened the day rather than sharpening it. Food did not create peaks, it filled gaps. It smoothed transitions. It prevented strain without interrupting flow. The body learned this relationship slowly through repetition. Hunger appeared, was met gently, and receded without ceremony. Satisfaction did not need to be prolonged or celebrated. It simply allowed the body to continue. In this way, nourishment became part of the texture of life rather than its subject. Like light moving across a wall or air shifting through an open space, it was noticed without being followed. Because food did not claim a fixed role, it did not create urgency. There was no pressure to eat at a specific moment or in a specific way. The body remained responsive rather than reactive. This responsiveness shaped calm. When nothing must happen, attention loosens. When nothing must be anticipated, the mind rests more easily within the present. Food supported this state by remaining predictable in its unpredictability. It appeared often enough to be trusted, but not so rigidly that it demanded planning. This balance reduced vigilance. The household did not need to watch the day for eating opportunities. Nourishment arrived naturally as part of ongoing activity. When it was absent, the body adjusted without alarm. This trust extended into the night. As food faded from awareness, it did not leave a gap. It left space. Space for stillness. Space for rest. Because nourishment had already done its work, the body did not seek it again before sleep. Energy had been sustained quietly across the day. There was no deficit to correct. The absence of a final eating moment allowed the nervous system to settle without interruption. Nothing reactivated the senses. Nothing reopened attention. Food did not pull the body back into engagement. It allowed it to continue releasing effort. This is why nourishment, in a Roman context, is best understood not as an event, but as atmosphere. It was always present, but rarely foregrounded. It shaped experience indirectly. Like background sound that becomes noticeable only when it stops, food's quiet presence was felt most clearly in its absence. When it no longer appeared, the body recognized that it was time to rest. This recognition did not require thought. It was embodied knowledge developed over countless similar days. The body learned when to stop asking. Because food was not tied to reward or pleasure, it did not stimulate wakefulness. It did not keep the mind active. It supported rest by remaining neutral. Pleasure existed, but it was mild and passing. It did not need to be extended. It did not demand repetition. It belonged to the moment and then released it. This neutrality allowed food to soften life rather than intensify it. There were no dramatic contrasts between hunger and fullness, deprivation and indulgence. Everything remained within a narrow, manageable range. Stability emerged from this narrowness. Not excitement, not abundance, but continuity. The body knew what to expect from nourishment, and so it did not fixate on it. Over time, this relationship shaped the way people moved through the day. Eating did not interrupt activity sharply. It flowed alongside it. When it ended, activity resumed without adjustment. And when activity ended, food did not replace it. Rest did. This is the quiet insight that emerges from observing Roman daily nourishment closely. Food did not organize life, it softened it. It reduced friction without becoming a focus. By remaining in the background, nourishment allowed other rhythms to lead. Light determined movement, fatigue determined rest. Food followed both without competing. This created a day that felt continuous rather than segmented. Nothing needed to be closed formally. Nothing needed to be opened deliberately. Life moved forward through gradual shifts. As night deepened, this continuity became especially gentle. With no final act to perform, the body could drift into stillness without resistance. There was nothing to complete, nothing to prepare, nothing to remember. Food had already passed through the day as quietly as it had arrived. It left no demand behind. And so, as awareness continues to thin, nourishment no longer needs to be held in mind. It can remain where it has always been, in the background, supporting life without asking for attention. If sleep arrives, it can arrive without being earned. And if wakefulness lingers for a while, it can remain soft, unoccupied, and unhurried. The day has already given what it needed to give. Food has already done what it needed to do. Nothing more is required. Good night.